This video is a follow-up to your bibliography assignment. So at this point, you've turned in an initial bibliography, you've received some feedback about those sources, and you're in the process of revising that bibliography and also thinking about the next steps, the next couple of assignments that are coming up. So what I'm going to talk about in this video is both reflecting a little bit on the bibliographies and how to make sure that you have the appropriate sources, so following up on the feedback that I've provided, and then also moving forward towards planning out your project and particularly starting to work on the literature review, which is a big assignment and is coming up in the near future. So in terms of the bibliography assignment, what you were asked to do is to compile a working bibliography of at least 8 peer-reviewed sources that are relevant to your project. And I asked you to include the complete citations using the Chicago Manual of Style author date format, okay? As you look at the feedback that I provided, I want you to reflect on a couple of questions. One is, what process did you use for finding your sources, okay? It's crucial that you use the instructions from the previous video that I posted about how to make use of the library's resources, particularly the databases and the catalog, because those are the places where you're going to be able to identify these peer-reviewed scholarly sources that you need for this assignment and for the particularly for the literature review assignment, okay? If you haven't watched that video, or even if you have, it makes sense to watch it or rewatch it to make sure that you know where to look. I'm going to recap that briefly in just a minute in this video, but a more detailed discussion is available there, okay? So think about where you found your sources and make sure you're using the appropriate databases and the library's catalog to make sure you get the best and most relevant kinds of sources. And the second thing to keep in mind as you, again, can look at the bibliography and work on revising the bibliography is once you've found sources, how did you evaluate them and decide whether they were a good fit or not, okay? It's also really important that as we look through the databases and look through the catalog, and with any search, a whole bunch of different things will come up. You're not going to just pick sort of the first 10 things that come up. You want to really look at those sources and figure out, what's going on in this article or this book. How would it fit into my project? Is it the best possible source for me? Is it relevant? Is it current? Is it on the kinds of issues that I think I want to pursue here? So that it's not just any 10 sources or any 8 sources, but that it's the best 8 sources that you can find right now as far as what you understand your project to be, okay? So I want you again to take these 2 questions and go back to your bibliographies as you revise them and reflect on those and try to make sure that you are both using the best techniques for finding sources and for evaluating sources and choosing which ones will make it onto your list. So again, this is the recap part. If you've, if you haven't already, or even if you have, rewatched the entire previous video about finding sources in the library, but here's a sort of really quick recap of both how to find stuff and how to figure out if the stuff you find is a good fit and should be kept. So the main places that you will be finding these peer-reviewed scholarly sources are 2 places within the library's website, right? So you're going to be using the Northeastern Library. You're going to go through the icon in Newport to the library's homepage. And there you're going to primarily use 2 functions. Again, I detailed this in the last video. One is to use the library's catalog. What I suggested in the last video is you can do a search that's bigger than just the Northeastern Library's holdings, like the iShare search, which is a bunch of Illinois libraries, and you can even go beyond that. You're going to use the catalog to find books and other book-like publications, like collected volumes. Make sure you do a search in that. And then the other primary place is going to be in the databases. And again, you're going to the library homepage. There's a whole long list of databases. And I suggested in the last video, and again here, a few of those databases that I think might be especially well suited to what you are trying to do in your projects. The Annual Reviews is a journal that is completely composed of review articles, meaning it's scholars who are going through a whole bunch of publications and providing you sort of almost like the cliff notes of what's going on in a particular field on a particular subject. So it can be a quick way to get up to speed on a certain topic without having to read 100 different articles about it. Instead, you can read one review article, and that person will sort of say, okay, in the last 20 years, here are the key themes that have emerged on this topic, right? So that's a place to look. The other two are popular and really broad databases where you can find a lot of different stuff from a lot of different fields. So that's why I've included them. Academic Search Ultimate is, again, really commonly used. It's a big database. It has a lot of different kinds of sources. So that's one where you can search. And JSTOR is another one. Big database, a lot of fields, will allow you to bring up lots of different kinds of things on your subjects. So these two places, the catalog and these databases, a good place to start. You can also search for journals by title, although you'll probably less likely do that. And I described that in the last video. And you can use Google Scholar. Again, do not just use Google. If you're going to use just a general internet search engine, use Google Scholar. In some ways, it's fine. It's good. It brings up all kinds of stuff. It brings up a lot of stuff, and it's a little bit, I think, harder to search effectively than in the databases in the library. So I would not start with Google Scholar. I would start with the library's databases and the library catalog. And once you've exhausted that, if you still want to look for something, then you can try Google Scholar. Okay. All right. So you've done these searches and you've got a whole long list of stuff that seems like it might be relevant. It has some of the keywords relevant to your topic. So how do you evaluate which ones are the best ones and which ones are the ones you should focus on, right? So what I suggest is you need to at least do some skimming or scanning to figure that out. At this stage, you're not going to read the entire article. It's too sort of time-consuming, labor-intensive. But you do need to do sort of a once-over of any source that you find to see if it seems like a keeper, right? So when I talk about a once-over, as I describe here on the slide, here's what I mean. You're going to read the title, of course, right? There's a certain amount of information just in the title of the thing. The citation, so you want to know, like, okay, what journal did this come from? What's the date, right? Like, if it's from 1975, it probably isn't very relevant. So what's the date? And then many journal articles will have an abstract, and books will have some kind of a summary in the item in the catalog, right? So if you can find a one-paragraph summary, right, whether in the form of an abstract or some kind of summary, read that. That should give you a decent sense of whether this is an article or a book worth pursuing. And then if you may be able to find enough from just doing that to move forward, to either go like, this seems great, this is good, I'm going to keep it, or nah, this one's actually on something else, and I'm going to let it go, right? If you can't tell from doing the skimming I've already talked about with the abstract, then you can also read the introduction and the conclusion of an article or of a book, and that should give you quite a good sense of what that piece is about, okay? So again, these are the tools of skimming and scanning. You do not want to sit down and carefully read every word of these articles at this point. You're just trying to get the big set of things that came up when you did these searches down to a shorter list of things that are actually the ones you're going to use, okay? So you're in a sort of editing process. So you don't have the time to carefully read all 30, 40, 50 hits that you get. You need to just like quickly get it down to a more reasonable number so you can really then carefully read those items that you know are a better fit, okay? Ultimately, once you've figured out that shorter list of sources, you will read more deeply and you will start doing things like taking notes, etc. But at this stage, what I primarily want you to do is just get a better list of potential sources together for your initial bibliography and for the sources that you will use for your literature review. Okay, so let's talk more about literature reviews, which is an assignment coming up. I'll talk about it at the very end of this. It's due in early March, but it's a bigger assignment as one that requires a lot of preparation and planning. So I want to make sure that you're clear on what a literature review is and how to do it. I touched on this subject already in the last video. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on it now to make sure that it's clear, okay? So the literature review that you'll be writing, and a literature review in general, is basically reading extensively on what's been published on a certain subject, and then writing up a sort of summary of what the most important issues and themes and questions are that are raised by that group of pieces, right? So you're essentially trying to look at a body of scholarship and present what are the currents that run through it, right? If somebody else can't read all 10 or 12 or 15 of those pieces, what are the take-home points, the key issues that you think are at the top of the list that people would need to know, okay? So you're going to do that and have that be part of your final paper for a couple of reasons. One is to look through what has been done in the fields or on these topics already, right? We don't want to reinvent the wheel when we're trying to write a paper. We don't want to repeat something that somebody already said 20 years ago. So part of it is that you want to provide some background, right, for yourself in terms of how to frame your project in a way that will push the field forward, right? So you need to know what's already been done so you know what should be done next, right? The other piece of it is to give sort of enough information to the reader that they will understand the points that you're making, right? So it's both sort of background and context, right? So that you can locate your own project in relationship to the scholarship that's happened before, and you have enough sort of info about your subject to be able for your points and your analysis to make sense to you and also to your reader, okay? All right, so to do the literature review, then you're going to read the literature, and you're going to review it, not in the sense of like, hey, this is a great article, or oh, that's a crappy article, but in the sense of figuring out what the patterns are that cut across all of that scholarship that you read and writing it up, okay? So what I suggest in terms of how you organize your thinking about the scholarship that you read is that as you're reading all your sources, you keep an eye out for two things, and I call them patterns and moments, okay? Here's what I mean by them. Patterns are when you're reading all your sources and you see that multiple sources are saying the same thing. That's one version of it. Or that multiple sources are talking about the same thing, but they have sort of different points of view. So maybe there's debate about that, but they're all sort of debating the same thing, right? Or another pattern could be what's not there, right? So everybody's talking about this, but there's a pattern of leaving a certain criterion out of the conversation, right? So patterns means you're looking for things that are relevant in multiple sources, right? Either they're things that people say repeatedly, things that people debate about and take different positions on, things that are consistently neglected or put to the side, anything like that, okay? That's a pattern. Moments are sort of specific things that happen in the sources or across a particular scholarly field that are sort of like a breakthrough or a significant event in the scholarship, right? So it could be somebody makes a really radically different but important analysis of something, or somebody discovers something, right? Somebody puts forward a weird new theory for how to analyze these issues, right? So the moment, and again, I use the terms patterns and moment because hopefully they sort of, you know, help you remember what I'm talking about, right? That it sounds like what it is, right? So the moment is, if the pattern is something that happens a lot over a whole bunch of different sources, the moment is something that stands out because it sort of, to some extent, stands alone, right? In that moment, like when it happens, it's a shift, or it's an event, or it's a breakthrough, or it's a change, or it's a massive contribution that influences everything that comes after it, right? So it could be a particular influential scholar, right? This person arrives and starts saying things that are really radically different or really change the field. It could be a certain publication. It could be a certain world event. Like before this event, people used to think about things this way, but then once this happened, then the nature of scholarship on that topic changed, right? So these are the two things that you're going to be looking for. I will say right now, most of what you will find will be in the patterns category. You may find a moment, right? If you're reading and every single source references this one publication that came out at some point and changed the face of the discipline, then that you might consider that as a moment, and maybe that's something that needs to be talked about. Most, though, of what you will find, and most of what will get into your literature review, are the patterns, okay? So as you read across, once you have your list of relevant sources, right? Once you revise your bibliography and you have peer-reviewed sources that are good choices for your project, then you're going to read all of them and you're going to look for those patterns and maybe moments, okay? So that's the first and sort of key step to starting to move towards organizing your literature review, okay? All right, so let's get more specific about the sequence of steps from the bibliography, the revised bibliography, to the literature review, all right? So once you have a revised bibliography, you are going to start processing each of those sources. This is the point where you are going to read them carefully and take notes on them or use some other way to sort of pull out all the main information so that you have it and you can use it in your paper, okay? So when I say processing, there's a few different ways of doing this, right? And I imagine you have your own way of doing it, so you can stick with whatever technique you've used before to read papers and to sort of take notes on them. One technique that can be useful is to use a template, right? Like, so for each source, you sort of write at the top of say a Word doc, the title of the article, you know, the keywords or the key issues that it discusses, a quick summary, any questions you have, etc., something like that, right? You can do things like underline or write notes in the margins. All of these are fine techniques, but what you want is to be able to basically take each of these sources and crunch it down to the key points that you're going to extract and write about in your paper, okay? So you need to reduce it. If you have a 20-page article, you're not going to talk about every single detail from that 20 pages. You're going to talk about primarily the main argument and the main evidence, right? So this processing step is about reading and pulling out that main information that you need that's going to transfer into your paper, okay? So again, the questions you want to ask yourself for each of your sources, and you want to write this down somewhere or type it up in a one-pager or however you want to do it. What's the main argument? What's the main evidence, okay? At a minimum. All right, once you've done that, let's say you have 10 sources, 12 sources, 15 sources, right? You've done this processing for each of them. You've read it carefully, you've taken notes, and you've written up a quick summary. You know what the main argument is, you know what the main evidence is. Then you're going to take those, 12, 15, however many they are. Take all of those, reduced version, those summaries that you have for each of your articles or books, and you're going to compare them. Right? You're going to look across all of them. And you're going to go, okay, are there any patterns or moments here? When I write up my little summary for each of these articles, do I see like, hey, actually 5 of them are all saying the same thing about this particular point? Or they're all really interested in this, or they're all criticizing that, right? So you're going to look across all the processed sources, and you're going to try to find the patterns and moments, okay? Then I want you to basically keep a running list of what those patterns and moments are, right? In a separate, open a separate document, right? And you're going to go like, okay, I've read all my sources, I've processed them, and I'm seeing now that there are these 3 patterns across the literature. Just put them in a document, just as a list, right? Those key issues, those patterns or moments, right? That list of 3 or 5 or whatever it is, it'll be a shortish list. That is the beginning of the organization of the sections of your literature review, okay? You're starting to outline your literature review with that little list, all right? Each of those items will probably, you can do some editing later on, but each of those items will become a section, a subsection in your lit review, okay? And again, I'm thinking you'll have 3 to 5, something like that, right? If you only have 1, that's a little bit thin. If you have 20, that's way too many, okay? And you won't find 20 patterns, I don't think. So you're starting to start from the big massive scholarship, all the literature you've read, then down to like the main points of each of them, and now you're going crunching even further and going across all the main arguments and evidence of each of them. What's the smaller set of things that are patterns and moments across them, right? So you've got your little list of key themes. These are the sections of your lit review, okay? Now, moving from there, this is sort of bare bones. Moving now towards actually writing the lit review, what you're going to do is under each of those items on your list, each of those what are now going to be subsection titles, basically, you're going to discuss what the sources say about that theme or issue, right? This doesn't mean all of them. So you might be like, on theme 1, 4 of my sources talk about it. So I'm going to talk about that here. I'm going to say, here's what they said. Here's where they agreed. Here's where they disagreed. The next item, you're going to talk about who talked about it, whatever, right? So basically, you're starting to flesh out through a discussion of what the sources say about that theme under that heading. So again, you're building your literature review in this way, right? So to write your literature review, you're not going to start from the intro. You're going to start with the guts of it. You're going to start with what are those key themes and what can I say about those themes based on this scholarship that I've been reading, okay? At the end, right, once you've done all that, you can start thinking about, well, how do they connect together? And that will be the sort of introduction and conclusion. But that's a little bit down the line. The most important thing right now is to make sure you've got the sources, you've processed the sources, you've identified the patterns and moments, and you start to write them up in this way that I've described. This is the beginnings of writing your lit review. And once you have those sections and your discussion of the sources within them, you've got the hardest part of the lit review done, okay? And then we can work more on framing it. So this is the transition from compiling a bibliography to organizing the information from that bibliography into a literature review. Okay. The other thing I just want to touch on is citations. For this course, including for the bibliography and for any assignments that we're doing from here on out, you are using Chicago Manual of Style author date format, okay? I've got links to sources on or guides on how to use this style on D2L, so please use those. Both of those guides that I have on there, one is the Chicago Manual of Style guide itself, the other is the Purdue OWL. In addition to having sort of describing like how you put together the different citations, they also have samples, right? Particularly the Purdue OWL has sample papers. That is a very useful way to figure out how to do citations. So instead of, just trying to sort of figure out what they mean by reading about it, you look at an example of how it's done properly, and then you use that as a model. And you're going to do the same thing that the model has, okay? So you know when it looks right, because if yours looks like the one on there, then you know you've done it right, okay? So I encourage you to do that. Now, all citations, whether it's Chicago Manual of Style or something else, all have the same basic elements, right? Citing sources is about giving credit for ideas to the people who originally wrote them, right? And as such, it's sort of an annotation, right? It's a really small way, like meaning we try to have as small a footprint as possible to indicate where something came from without having like a paragraph suddenly popping up where you're going to have to discuss it in detail. So therefore, there's a distinct number of specific elements to the citation that allow for it to cover all the bases in a really small space, right? So those elements are who, when, what, who published it, and how can you get it, right? Who wrote it, when was it created, what's it called, who published it, and how can it be accessed, right? That's it. It's really not that complicated. Everything else having to do with citations is just stuff like punctuation and order, right? So all citations are going to have this stuff, but the convention is to do it in a systematic way. So you are going to use the Chicago Manual of Style author date format to organize these elements into a particular format, right? So, author last name, comma, author first name, period, date, etc. Okay? It looks like this. This is how a bibliographic entry or the references cited at the end of a paper looks in Chicago Manual of Style author date format, right? Again, you've got all the information you need about how to follow this format through those guides that are linked in D2L. So make sure you review that if you haven't already, and please do use this style on all subsequent assignments, right? So you're ultimately going to use Chicago manual style author date for your final paper. And I want you to start using it now so that by the time you get there, it's not going to be, an extra heavy lift to try to learn how to do the style. If you do it along the way in all your assignments, you'll be quite familiar with it and it won't be a hard piece of it when you get to the end. Okay? All right. So here are the next assignments then, in keeping with what we've just been talking about. There's one assignment coming up later this week, at the end of the week. And then after that, the next assignment is the literature review, which is due in the first week of March. Okay? So the assignment 3 coming up later this week. This is a research project planning assignment, and there are 2 parts to it. All right? The first part is about your data. We've already talked a bit about what kinds of data you're going to be drawing from, right? Whether it's statistical reports out of the UN or something else, right? I've talked with you about various options for that. So for part 1 of this assignment, you're going to write up a statement of your plan for collecting and analyzing data. And I give you very specific prompts. All you need to do is answer them. What kinds of data or evidence are you planning to collect? Be as specific as possible, right? If you say, oh, I want to use some databases that are online, go find them, figure out what you can access, and either include the link or even better, describe what that database includes and how you're going to use it, right? How much stuff are you going to collect? What's the timeline, right? How are you going to analyze it? So as specific and detailed as you can be at this stage about what you're going to do on the data end, the better, right? So keeping it vague at this point will not help you because you want to start to see how the different pieces fit together. So be as detailed and specific as you can on that. The second part of the assignment, of assignment 3, due later this week, is to use the process I've just described to start to move forward on your literature review. And what I want you to do for this part is to identify the main themes of your literature review. So what we were just talking about is how you will start with your revised bibliography, process all those sources, and from that come up with the key patterns and moments that cut across all those sources. That's what I'm talking about. Those are the main themes, all right? So for this part 2 of assignment 3, identify the main themes, right? Again, it's going to be something like 3 to 5 main themes. And then I want you to indicate which of your sources are connected to each of those themes and in what ways, okay? So you can literally have sort of a list. Theme 1 is this, and these 3 sources or these 5 sources are all relevant to that theme in these ways. Theme number 2 is this, and these 6 sources, whatever it is, right? So you're going to tell me both what your themes are and how your sources are connected to those themes. So again, you're starting to basically do a mini outline of what will become your literature review, all right? Now, one of the reasons for having you do this sort of intermediary step where you do a sort of plan for your lit review this week is that then that will allow me to give you feedback on your assignment 3 plan so that you can then build on it before the actual lit review is due. So the actual lit review, right, like the actual written completed literature review is due March 7th, okay? And for that, you're going to write a lit review of a minimum of 12 sources, all right? There are handouts for both of these assignments on D2L. Please take a look, particularly the one for the literature review, as it provides more information. Another really important thing to note is that for around the time of the literature review assignment, right, immediately after you turn in the literature review, we will be having individual meetings. I will meet with each of you to talk about your literature review, give you specific feedback on that, and help you at this juncture in your projects, okay? So on the syllabus, you'll see a link to where you can sign up for an individual meeting on the 8th or 9th, all right? I put a bunch of times in there. If none of those times work for you, please let me know and I'll find another time. It's crucial that we meet. This is going to be around the halfway point of the semester, and we want to make sure that everything's on track, and particularly that you've got your literature review in good condition. The literature review is sort of the base upon which you're going to build the rest of the project, so we want to make sure that that's in a good condition before moving forward, okay? As you work on all this, maybe a more general point, make sure that you are keeping a close eye on the syllabus. The syllabus is a complete sequence of all the different assignments you're going to do, when they're due, when we're going to meet, when we're not going to meet, all of those things. So it's really crucial that you keep an eye on that schedule and all of the dates on there, okay? This is a big project. There's a lot to it. So I encourage you to keep up with the dates on the syllabus, because I carefully planned it out to make sure you would have time to get through all of the steps to the finished project, okay? So you don't want to spend sort of too much time on the bibliography, because then that robs some time from the next step, all right? So again, please, 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 if you do nothing else, as you prepare for this, be sure to go back and review the syllabus, make sure you know what you've already done and what's coming up, and that will help us, again, stay on track and stay on schedule. So I hope this has been helpful in terms of thinking about next steps. If you have any questions at all, of course, let me know, and good luck with your work this week.